Hey guys, Josh from Adaptive Channel, and today what we're going to be discussing is something that seems kind of lost to history, and there's not a lot of information about it other than when it was first presented to the public, and that is the International / Navistar camless diesel engine. You might be saying, what the heck's a camless diesel engine? I mean, an engine needs certain things, right? It needs pistons and a cylinder block, and connecting rods and a crankshaft and a camshaft and valves, right? No. I mean, an engine is an internal combustion engine. So really all it needs is a cylinder. It needs to get air in and out of the cylinder in a way to inject fuel and then ignite the fuel. And certain things don't necessarily have to be in an engine, right? And I'm sure this was kind of International's thinking at the time. The time what we're talking about is around the year 2000. And around the year 2000, and the only reason I even know about this is because my buddy Dale emailed me, and in passing he just mentioned the International camless engine. I said, what the heck is that? And I started doing a bunch of research on it. And yes, so International, around the year 2000, was in development with Sturman Industries, which is still in business, to develop a camless diesel engine. You might be saying, well, what the heck kind of idea is this, International? I mean, you've already got the max force, no one likes that. You've got lots of problems. Well, remember in the year 2000, International wasn't really in the same position and opinion that people have of them currently. They didn't have the max force yet. They were making Ford Power Strokes. They had worked with Caterpillar, who was still making diesel engines for trucks at the time also, to develop the Huey fuel system, which was kind of revolutionary at the time, even though it's kind of gone by the wayside now. And they we're thinking ahead. I mean, this is an idea that if you think about it, makes a lot of sense. I mean, a camless engine, think of that. I mean, a camshaft gives an engine a lot of its personality. And what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of time, like hot rodders will put a bigger cam. And generally what they mean by a bigger camshaft is more lift, meaning more of the opening of the valve or longer duration. And longer duration allows more air in or out of the engine. So if you could control that, which with a camshaft you are controlling it, but whatever camshaft you have installed, you can't really change it. So if you had a way of, let's say, having a much lower lift and lower duration camshaft for idling, you could have very smooth idling. However, at higher RPMs or higher load demands, you could have a very aggressive camshaft profile, but without a camshaft at all. And the way you would do that would be what Sturman Industries calls a hydraulic valve actuator. Some places call them a free valve. Basically, similar to kind of how a Jake or an intake valve actuator works, you'd have a digital or electronic over hydraulic or over pneumatic control system that would open the valves based on the computer. Now, the computer's already doing the injecting the fuel, so why not do it for the valves? It would eliminate the need of the camshaft, need of the cam bearings. If it had push rods, you wouldn't need those anymore. You wouldn't need rocker arms. You wouldn't necessarily even need valve springs. You would still need some sort of valve to open and close to let air in and out of the engine. But you could really, with electronic controls, control what that engine was doing. Not only that, it could be more efficient. Now, of course, it being more efficient is hard to say because they never made these engines. Now, Sturman Industries did make a truck engine that ran the Pikes Peak race, and it actually made the truck all the way up the race and back down without the engine shutting down. And that's the first time they've ever done that with a camless engine, apparently. And there are stories about that all over the internet. There's also stories around the year 2000 about International making this engine. Apparently it's supposed to be a V6 4.5 liter camless engine, and it was supposed to be basically the smaller version of the, not smaller, but a small version of their engines as the Power Strokes, and it was going to go in trucks and vans and all sorts of stuff. And then if you just keep digging, it just vanishes. No more stories about it around the year 2003. And all the stories from about 2000 to 2003 are generally talking about the big change in the diesel industry coming up, which was 2007. And 2007, of course, was when all the large tiered emissions started for diesel engines, where you had to have generally a lot of EGR. You had your DPFs installed. You had ultra-low sulfur diesel required because of the DPFs. So there are some really big changes going on at this time. Now, you might be saying, well, why didn't they make it, Josh? And To tell you the truth, I don't have an answer for that. I looked all over the place and couldn't find it. What I did find out, though, is lots of manufacturers have tried or experimented with camless designs. Some have not necessarily made one, like Honda made their VTEC design, which is variable valve timing for their camshaft, but it still has a camshaft. It's just changing the timing a little bit. Can't really affect the duration, can't affect the lift. Now, trucks do, in general, have something that electronically controls your valves to some extent, and of course those are your Jake brakes or compression brakes, some manufacturers call them, and those do open the exhaust valves when needed, and that's just for braking purposes though. Engine braking, not braking the engine. But CAT did have those on their intake valves, known as variable valve actuators or intake valve actuators, but those were emissions related. They had nothing to do with the actual operation of the normal 4-stroke cycle of the engine. But let's think about it. If you could control your intake opening and closing with electronics, why not do it? Well, this is, after reading a lot of forums and articles, kind of the question. It would be a huge change to the engine. Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Engines change all the time. They went to common rail. They didn't used to have common rail. They had HUE fuel systems. But most seems like the engine changes have more to do with the fuel systems, not necessarily with the base engine. Now, there have been differences with turbochargers. There was a compound turbo design CAT used. Other manufacturers, a lot of them now use variable geometry turbochargers, which are very complicated and electronically controlled also. So why not go with an intake, or not an intake valve actuator, but a hydraulic valve actuator like the Sturman Industries one? So even though I don't 100% know the answer, having done the research on the engine, it turns out that probably the reason they didn't make it was several-fold. One is the efficiency gains on a turbo diesel engine is not a huge change because of one thing, the turbo part of the diesel engine. Now, unlike gas engines where they need a specific fuel ratio, diesels don't care about that necessarily. They just need enough air to burn the diesel fuel they're injecting. So if you want to make more power, you just really need more air. And they can have a somewhat aggressive camshaft and high compression ratios. They're relying on the high compression ratio to ignite the fuel. So it doesn't really matter as much as a gas naturally aspirated engine on the variable nature of having a no camshaft engine. Not only that, fuel systems were getting more advanced at this time. So through electronics, they could control the fuel more, didn't necessarily need to mess with the air as much. So with advents such as the common rail fuel system, very high fuel pressures to them, that took care of hard starting conditions, smooth out idle, cleaner burn in general. Also, it's more efficient than the older fuel systems. Now, there are problems, of course, with any changes, and most of the manufacturers seem to take an approach of, instead of cleaning the combustion cycle as much, they take an after treatment approach with a DPF, SCR catalyst, that type of thing, not necessarily like, hey, let's get rid of the camshaft. Now, also, the turbo, as I just mentioned, has a lot to do with it. Of course, in a naturally aspirated engine, you need more lift and more duration on the intake, particularly, but also the exhaust, as RPMs and load increase. With a turbo, it kind of takes care of that also. Not necessarily the exhaust side, but the air inside, because as your load and RPMs increase, you get more boost. So even though your cam duration and lift is the same, you're getting more air. So you don't really need a camless engine. That's not to say they couldn't invent them and make them better, but I feel that manufacturers like, hey, we already got a camshaft. In general, they're very reliable. Why reinvent the wheel, folks? And of course, nowadays, what is everyone talking about? Not engines anymore necessarily. Unless you're me, I still talk about engines, but it's all about electric. So it's transitioning to the Tesla truck or whatever other electric vehicle. Now, you don't see a lot of electric trucks yet, and I think it might be a little while before those are actually marketable, but that seems to be the direction all the industry is going now. So most manufacturers, they don't really care about new engine technology as much as older manufacturers. I won't say older manufacturers, but a few years ago they would have cared a lot more about big engine improvements, whereas now it just seems like we're just going to work on electric. So that's how it is. So unfortunately, I don't have an exact answer why they stopped. I did several hours of research on this to try to find out why, and I can't find out. There's probably someone watching this video that does know the answer though. If you do, leave it in the comment sections. I'll probably pin it to the top, and then everyone would know what's happening. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.